This first story is titled, Japan is Full of Monsters. I grew up in Okinawa, Japan because I was a military brat. My father and his friends along with my younger brother and a few of our father's friends' sons would go fishing deep in the woods at a secluded fishing hole that only locals would typically know of. So one day it was almost time to go and my father instructed me, my younger brother, and the other guys' sons to start toting the extra fishing gear back to the car, which was probably a little less than half a mile away. As we were passing underneath a bridge, we heard a loud crash from above in some nearby trees. All four of us looked up to see a creature that I can only describe as resembling a massive mongoose fox-like looking beast. Covered in dark brown hair and roughly the size of a young lion, it had two tails that were bushy like a fox. It looked at all of us briefly, then jumped away in leaps and bounds that were not possible by any creature we know of on Earth. It was at that point that I realized that a lot of the Japanese manga, anime, and Pokemon folklore they put on TV isn't completely fiction-based. They are really telling us about cryptids that they have known existed since the beginning of recorded history. I know a lot of people get on these sites and post make-believe stories for likes, but I have never been as terrified and as puzzled as I was by this event. Mind you, for people saw it, it was broad daylight, and none of us were old enough to be influenced by any sort of drugs. This next short story is titled, My Dead Physics Teacher on the Sidewalk. My physics teacher died on the 8th of March 2020. I was at her funeral. She was one of the best teachers in the school. I was devastated. One day later after her funeral, I was going to school. I was on the sidewalk. I saw her. She died because of cancer. Have you all ever had an experience like this? Let me know in the comments below if you have. This next encounter short story is titled, Figure in Red Cloak. So I'm trying to look for someone with a similar experience, or someone that has any information about this. I was driving my brother to school at 2:30 a.m. for a trip. I passed by this area with shops and dropped him off, and as I am driving back home alone I passed by the shops again, and there was an extremely tall figure in a long red cloak standing on the sidewalk. I couldn't see its face or anything. It looked like it was looking at the ground and didn't move at all. As I passed by at the car and looked at the figure in my rear view mirror, I started to become filled with a weird gut feeling of what I saw and started to cry and had a panic attack on the way home. I'm not sure what I saw was a person. Was it a spirit? I'm trying to make sense of it because now it is stuck in my brain very vividly. This next story is titled, Goblin Sighting When I Was a Child. I know this might sound crazy, but when I was around 2 or 3 years old, around 2006 or 2007, my mom and I had just came home from my grandma's house after she got off work, and we arrived home at like 6:30 or 7 p.m. I know some say that you can't remember anything from a young age, and that my mom might just be influencing me to remember this, but I actually remember this very vividly, and I saw another similar story posted on here and it literally gave my mom and I goosebumps because of how similar it was. So here it goes. We walked into our house and I went to go play in my room while my mom started to cook dinner. I remember I was just playing in my room, then I step out my room to start wandering around when I looked into my father's gaming room. Weird, I know, but then I saw this goblin-like creature who looks just like the Green Goblin from the Spider-Man comic books. He was wearing a pointy purple hat, pointy purple shoes, with pointy ears and a grin with sharp teeth. He stood about 6 or 7 feet. When I saw him I ran to my mom in the kitchen and I started tugging on her to come with me, and she immediately followed after me. And she saw him as well, but he moved into our hallway and he looked very confused or concerned, like he didn't know where he was at. When he looked at us both he looked surprised. He looked very inhumane, but he didn't instill fear in us. Instead it was more of a calming presence. Then after he saw us he roared back towards the gaming room and just disappeared. My mom went to go check to see where it went, but he was nowhere to be found. Mind you, there were all 2 windows, and they were blocked off by a desk, and the windows were closed while we were gone. Many have told me that this was just my dad playing a prank on us, but he was never around and he isn't nearly as tall as the goblin we saw. We still talk about it to this day, telling the exact same story each time. I still can't get this creepy image out of my head, and I just wanted to come on here to get an explanation on this, or to see if anything similar has happened to anyone. Mind you, we lived in California in the Bay Area. Please let me know if you've had a similar experience because I want to know. I have attached image very similar to what I saw. This next story is titled Unsolved Ghost from My Childhood. In like 2004, I was about 5 years old and I absolutely hated sleeping in the dark, so much so that I would get nosebleeds being under the cover. I lived with my sister and my mom and always slept with one of them, but this night, I decided to just face my fears and finally take my head from under the cover, with my night light as my only saving grace. This was the night I saw something that I still cannot explain. I saw a ghost that was also a skeleton that had on a pirate costume walk from one wall of my room, I believe from my sister's room, through the wall closest to me. As I got older, being scared of the dark more than ever, I tried to think of what that was about. I never seen Pirates of the Caribbean to this day, and that was the only thing I could think of that had the sort of imagery that I seen. Has anyone seen anything like I described? That isn't my only ghost story either. My sister passed away in 2006, so then it was just me and my mom. Moved to a new house in a different part of town and everything. Being still scared of the dark and afraid to sleep by myself, I slept in my mom's room till about 13. One night in her room, falling asleep, I had the feeling that I was falling, but I didn't react or move. After I sat there for a minute, turned away from my mother the whole time, she randomly says, "That was your sister." I found comfort in those words and eventually was able to go to sleep. I was glad to know that the second presence I felt was someone familiar to me, but the first one, I don't think we'll ever find an answer for whatever that was. This next story, I will call the 2009 clown incident. A friend of mine and I had the same experience at the age of 9. She is a year older than me, so she was 9 in 2008 and I was 9 in 2009. 2009 woke up at night, feeling a weight on my feet. I saw a big man, dressed up as a jester minstrel. He was smiling and I looked at him in shock, telling him something like, "You're not real." He laughed and told me to touch his face. I still remember the feel I had touching his beard. It felt real. He then said, "I just killed your parents," and I ran to my parents' bedroom. They were very alive and sleeping. When I went back to my bedroom, the man wasn't there. For years I had the feeling of being followed by someone. Maybe I was only scared. I then became friends with the friend I mentioned earlier and I told her about my experience. Years later, we were 16 to 17, think. She told me she had almost the same encounter. 2008, it was December, Christmas season, and she woke up at night hearing noises. She saw a big man, dressed up as a jester minstrel, but she thought he was Santa Claus because he had a bag on his shoulder. He ignored her and went to the living room, walking slowly. She fell asleep again, so our question is, did anyone meet this jester man in 2008, 2009, or at the age of 9? We are now 20 to 21 and still can't find an explanation. This next short story is similar to the previous story, where two people witnessed something paranormal, only they were both there. I'll call this one the headless entity. When I was around 12 or 13, I went out with my friend in the evening. She was the same age. After a few hours, my mom called me to come home, so I had to hurry. I chose a shorter path, which I usually wouldn't take because it was a dark street with only a few lights. I always had goosebumps when walking down that street, but I had to be home on time. I was walking quickly and got a few steps ahead of my friend when I suddenly had the feeling that someone was watching me. I looked beside me and saw something that I will never forget. And I saw a man without a head sitting on a bench, wearing a black suit. He was huge, with long legs, and didn't even have a neck, only shoulders. Even though the figure had no head, I felt its gaze on me. I was frozen. I couldn't move or talk, only stare. It felt like minutes, but it was probably only a few seconds before I heard my friend calling me. I started to run without saying a word, but then I noticed she wasn't following me. I looked back and saw her staring at the thing. I screamed at her to run, and she finally did. We ran for our lives without saying a word. When we got to my house, I asked her what she had seen. Her reply was, "A man without a head." She had seen exactly the same thing I had. The next day, we went back to the school, but there was no bench there. We're both 20 for now, and we still don't know what we saw that night. any idea what kind of entity it was. This next story, I'll call the Joker-like figure in my wardrobe. Last week I was watching a video about unsolved mysteries or something like that. Don't really remember the subject. And there was a girl saying that she saw the image of a Joker-like figure in her wardrobe when she was a kid. She said that it looked like the old series version. Okay, that unlocked what is probably one of my oldest memories of all time. When I had something like 3 to 4 years old, my little bed was in front of a wardrobe. And in the middle of the night I had what today I realize was sleep paralysis, and the wooden door of the wardrobe became somehow translucent and I could see what was inside. In the middle of some blankets I could see a figure just like Joker, more like Shaco from League of Legends, with pointy nose and long pale face and chin, just there looking at me with a really big smile. Naturally I woke up crying my heart out in fear when my parents came to quote-unquote rescue me. The thing is, I had sleep paralysis a couple of times after that, and nothing strange happened beside the awareness of being conscious and yet paralyzed. I have to say that about that time I was never in contact with nothing about the Joker, and obviously League of Legends is Shaco. This next story is called A Strange Girl in Japan. It happened in August 2019 while I was visiting my cousin and friends in Yokohama. I was 19 at that time. I was on my way back from my friend's apartment to my cousin's place where I was staying. It was close enough so I decided to walk, despite it already being dark and late. I was close to Yokohama Harbor, walking on the pathway right next to water. In the distance, I noticed a figure standing next to the railings, staring at the sea. There was nobody else around. I got a strange feeling from them, but I had to pass them. The figure didn't move when I got close. For some reason I stopped to look at them when I was right behind. The person was wearing a black trench coat reaching past their knees and had their hands tucked in its pockets. While I was staring at them, they turned around to look at me. The street lamps provided a good light and I was standing close enough to make out their features. It was a girl, clearly foreign, and the first thing I noticed was how absolutely beautiful she was. Rather tall, maybe around 5'8", dressed in modern entirely black clothes, with dark, wavy hair reaching her shoulders. She was young, couldn't be older than 18, maybe younger. My gaze lingered on her eyes and a chill went down my spine. They were light, but completely empty. It was like looking into a void. She stared at me. Her expression was blank. It didn't change since she turned to me, but I had a feeling she was waiting for me to do or say something. I tried, but I couldn't find words. I was frozen in place. We stared at each other for a while, until at one moment I blinked and she disappeared. There's nowhere she could have gone. Just vanished into thin air. Scared, I hurried to my cousin's apartment. When he saw me, he pointed out that I look white as a sheet. But hearing my story, he just laughed that I hallucinated a hot girl. I researched Japanese urban legends out of curiosity, but I couldn't find anything about a young girl wearing a trench coat. She didn't even look like a ghost. It was like looking at a normal human being. A few days later, while my cousin and I were on our way back to his apartment, something on the other side of the street caught my eye. I looked, and in the shadow of a back alley, leaning against a wall, was the same girl, still dressed in black, wearing a coat. She was clearly looking at me. Her expression was the same as then, blank, maybe a little bored. I shook my cousin's shoulder and told him to look, but when we did, she was already gone, just vanished again. For the rest of my stay, I had a feeling someone was watching me whenever I went outside, and sometimes I could see the black coat in the crowd. It could have been just my paranoia, but I was seriously afraid. When I came back home, the feeling stopped, and nothing weird happened again. Does anyone have any ideas what that could have been? This next story I will call the Oklahoma Mothman Encounter. Date, 1998 to 2001. Location, Oklahoma. For years, I've kept these experiences to myself, unsure of how to explain what I saw or if anyone would believe me. I should mention that I'm agnostic and generally try to be skeptical, but as time has passed, I've come to realize that these events are a part of who I am, a strange chapter in my life that still lingers in the back of my mind. I've decided it's time to share the story, not just for myself, but in the hope that someone, somewhere, might understand what I went through. These are the events that changed my view of the world, and even now, they continue to haunt me in ways I can't fully explain. So, here it is, the truth of what happened, starting with the fireball in the sky. The fireball. This strange series of events began when I was around 10 to 12 years old. One night when I was heading to stay the night at my cousin's house in our small rural community in Oklahoma. My mom had given me permission, and even though it was already late, we set out on foot. My cousin lived about a mile away, down the road in a quiet area surrounded by farmland and dense woods. As we walked, about halfway to his house, we both noticed something unusual in the sky. A fireball, orange and red, was descending. What was odd about it was the flames shooting out from its sides in a V shape, almost like the fiery trail of a craft entering the atmosphere. The flames were sharp and intense, as if they were stabilizing the object's descent. We stopped in our tracks, transfixed by what we were seeing. As the fireball continued its descent, it slowed down, almost hovering, before disappearing behind the tree line. It didn't fall randomly. It seemed to be guided, moving with purpose, which made the whole thing feel surreal. This incident has stayed with me all these years, especially considering the controlled way it descended with those V-shaped flames. It wasn't like anything natural, more like a craft entering the atmosphere than a meteor or falling object. The metallic craft. Next, I had a strange and unforgettable experience at school during an after-school event. I was outside with a group of friends when I wandered off alone toward the gym. That's when I saw something odd in the sky, a shiny, metallic, kite-shaped craft hovering about 50 feet above me. It was completely still, emitting a faint hum. I remember thinking it almost seemed like it was watching me. For a moment, time seemed to slow down as I stared in disbelief. After what felt like about a minute, the craft suddenly shot off at an incredible speed, taking off at a 45-degree angle without turning, leaving a blurry streak behind. It was so fast that I barely had time to process what I had just seen before it vanished into the distance. The shadow figure. One day, after school, I went back to a stick fort my friends and I had built in the woods behind the school. I was alone, working on the fort, when I noticed something strange. About 200 feet away, a dark figure was moving through the woods, emitting a low humming sound. The figure appeared to float, with no visible legs, and was cloaked entirely in black. In my mind, it looked like something from The Lord of the Rings, like a ring wraith. I froze in place, terrified, as the figure stopped in front of me and seemed to turn and notice me. Panicking, I ran straight through the fort's wall, sprinting through thorns and a boggy area until I reached the highway, where I followed it for miles back home. The voices from the woods. Another unsettling experience occurred when my cousin and his twin sister told me they had been hearing voices calling them from the woods. I didn't think much of it at first, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave me. One day, while visiting their house, I experienced it firsthand. We were outside playing when we suddenly heard two voices calling us from deep in the woods. The voices sounded just like my cousin and his sister, soft, friendly, coaxing us to come closer, inviting us to play. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and a chill ran down my spine. There was something wrong about it. The voices felt inhuman. Terrified, we yelled back, telling the voices we weren't coming to them, but for them to come to us instead. The voices didn't respond, and after a few tense moments, everything went silent. The next day, we asked other kids from our school who lived nearby if they knew anything about it. None of them had heard or seen anything. There was no explanation for what we had heard, and it left us deeply unsettled. The blue orb. One night, while staying at my cousin's, something strange and unforgettable happened. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep. The room was dim, lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through the window. My cousin didn't have curtains or blinds, so the driveway outside was clearly visible. Just as I started to drift off, a soft bluish-white glow caught my eye. At first, I thought it might be car lights or a reflection, but as I sat up and looked out the window, I realized it was moving deliberately too smoothly. It wasn't random. I was instantly terrified, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But my curiosity got the best of me. I turned back toward the window to get another look. Then, as if aware of my presence, it began to descend slowly, gliding down the driveway. Its movement was unnervingly smooth, almost intelligent, and it illuminated the ground beneath it with an otherworldly glow. A luminous blue orb hovered just outside, its light pulsating softly, as if alive. It was about the size of a basketball, radiating a strange energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I scrambled back into bed, pulled the blanket over my head, and peeked out cautiously. The orb moved right up toward the window, filling the room with its bluish light. Paralyzed with fear still until it finally floated away, disappearing. The experience left me rattled. Even now, I can still see its eerie glow in my mind's eye. The Mothman encounter, the final, most terrifying experience, occurred one night while stargazing at my cousin's house, near the woods behind my school. We often ventured out at night to stargaze, since the area had so little light pollution. Our favorite spot was a small horse trailer belonging to my uncle. We'd climb onto the roof with binoculars and lay down, trying to identify constellations and planets. On this particular night, as we approached the trailer, I noticed something odd on top of it. At first, it looked like torn black trash bags thrown onto the roof. I pointed it out to my cousin, and we cautiously approached. When we were about 15 feet away, my cousin shined his flashlight on it. The beam revealed something that froze us in place. Its wings unfurled, and its head emerged, revealing a terrifying visage, giant glowing red eyes, sharp shark-like teeth, a slit nose, and a grayish-black humanoid body with tattered bat-like wings. We stood there, motionless, unable to move. The creature's breath was visible in the cold night air as it hissed at us, its wings slowly extending. The hiss was low and guttural, sending shivers down my spine. Finally, we were overcome with terror and bolted, sprinting back to the house as fast as we could. The next day at school, we shared our experience during our class. We didn't know what we had seen, but our teacher overheard us and interrupted. She pulled up a picture of the Mothman on her computer, and it matched the creature perfectly. Its face is burned into my memory. Even now, when I'm alone outside at night, I can't help but look up, scanning the skies and shadows, afraid it might return. I still have nightmares that it's come back for me. After that night, all the strange activity seemed to stop. But I spent years trying to make sense of these experiences, still haunted by the things I saw and heard. Disclaimer: this narrative was written with the assistance of OpenAI's ChatGPT to ensure clarity, organization, and coherence. While the structure and wording were refined through this tool, the events, details, and experiences described are entirely accurate and drawn from my personal recollections. This approach was used solely to present the account in a professional and accessible format. This next story, I will call Strange Woman with Strange Feet. As a kid 11 years old, I was once in the forest looking for lost things. Then I came across a small pond, really small pool in the forest. A woman was standing in the water. The water was reaching her knees. She was looking to the other direction, and I could not see her face. She had white hair and some old-looking clothes. They looked extremely old-fashioned. She did not turn to me and she did not move at all, but I could see her breathing. I came closer and then she left the water and did stand on the forest ground. As she was raising her feet from the water, I saw that her feet were reversed. I mean, the toes and heels were reversed. I was shocked, frozen, but I freaked out and did turn around and begin to run. During running, I turned back and could see her face now. She was looking at me with an evil grin and extremely pale face. I went home and told the story to my parents, and they did not believe me. I have never forgotten this encounter and want to ask if you have ever heard of people having reversed feet.
That's all for this video, everyone. Hope you all enjoyed.
Please subscribe for more content like this in the future. Your subscriptions help keep me motivated to make more videos for the channel. Until next time, the Alley Ghost.